Hi, this is Ned Siegfried from Siegfried and Jensen. As proud sponsors of BeliefCast, we hope you are inspired by Todd's weekly podcasts, which contain so many courageous stories of recovery and personal growth. Remember, it's not what happened in the past that matters, it's what happens in the future. We invite you all to work hard and be optimistic about your future. Enjoy today's podcast.
Welcome back. This is Todd Sylvester with the Todd Sylvester Inspires BeliefCast. Thank you so much, Siegfried and Jensen, for your trust in me and your belief in me and sponsoring this. And it means so much to me. I also like to thank our other sponsor, Veracity Networks. Thank you as well for believing in me. And thank you for tuning in week after week. We're blowing up and it's amazing. And it's because of the amazing guests I've had on who have come on and they're vulnerable. They talk about their own struggles and things like that. And more importantly, just we're all the same. We all have a story and we're all trying to get through this life. And today we have Allan Richards. He goes by Al. Al, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, thank you, Todd, for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. So Al has actually got his own podcast called The Other Side of Addiction. He's just kind of getting it started, but there's a reason why you call it The Other Side of Addiction. Will you tell us that real quick?
Yeah, the reason why it's called The Other Side of the Addiction is because I'm the one who has lived on the other side of addiction. So
yes.
A lot of AA meetings I used to go to with my wife to give her support. You know, a lot of the guests that they had, really all of the guests that they had were people who had battled the addiction. Right. And I would look around the room and go, well, there's a lot of loved ones, family members, and friends. We go through it as well.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah.
No, thank you. That's awesome. And you know, I've had a lot of people on this podcast who have been through their own addiction and overcome it. I've had a few, but not very many people on the other side of it. And so I'm real excited, Al, to have you on. A little background on Al. He grew up in West Jordan, Utah. He was blessed with two amazing and beautiful daughters, Megan and Ariel. He's also been blessed with some grandkids. You don't look old enough to be a grandpa, but but yeah, you got some grandkids.
Yeah, three incredible grandkids. Yeah, they're amazing. Wow.
So you've also dabbled a little bit in acting. I was reading that and I was like, wow, that's really cool. You're on a Hallmark film called Christmas Tree Lane. You're also on the second season of The Chosen, where you played a Roman soldier. And you do, if you don't know Al, if you can't see him, but he's built pretty good. He looks pretty strong. So I could see you being one of those for sure. And you're also on a few commercials and things like that. But ultimately, we're here to talk about what it's like to live on the other side of addiction. Your wife has struggled with alcoholism, and that put you down a dark path. And I can't wait to have you share what that was and kind of how you dealt with it and overcame that as well. So why don't we start, Al, with tell us where you grew up and tell us a little bit about your childhood.
Well, I grew up in West Jordan, as you mentioned earlier. My parents moved out there when I was, I think about 9 years old. Kind of a different time of my life. I was just battling a disease. I had a disease in my hip as a little boy called Perthes. It's like a form of a polio. Okay. And the doctors told my parents I was probably never going to walk again, but my parents chose not to tell me. And after my surgery, a few months after that, I was out walking and playing just like a normal 9-year-old boy. And for anybody that grew up here in Salt Lake City back in 1971, 72, and they knew West Jordan, it was all farm. It was just covered with alfalfa fields, wheat fields. So I spent a lot of time playing in the canal ditches, irrigation ditches. My buddy and I, we used to like to watch or walk the canal ditches. Just to flush pheasants and try to throw dirt clods at them and try to hit them. And we tried it for years. Dirt clods. Yeah, we had dirt clod fights.
You know, that brings back so many memories, that word dirt clod.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it, a dirt clod, and that's what we used to do too. We used to throw dirt clods.
Well, you know, I mean, they still hurt if they hit you, but not as hard as a rock.
Yeah, that's true. No, that's awesome.
Yeah, but I came from a family, had two brothers, or not two brothers, a brother and a sister. We're all 7 years apart, which is kind of weird. So I was 7 when my brother was born, and I was 14 when my sister was born. Not a lot of love in the family. I don't think very often I heard "I love you," you know, in the family. But you know, every family's different.
Sure.
But, yeah, just enjoyed growing up out there. Ended up going to Bingham High School. West Jordan High School wasn't built at the time.
Okay.
Graduated in 81 from Bingham, and in 81 is when West Jordan High School opened up. But hung out with seven incredible guys where we all hung out, which was kind of weird. And you probably hear this quite a bit with what you do. But, yeah, there was 4 of us who were the big partiers, always going to the kegers and drinking the beer and, having a few doobies and things like that. And the other guys were very LDS, so they always took care of us. They always drove us home. And, of course, back in those days, even if you did drive home, usually at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, there wasn't any cars on the road because there was nothing out there.
Yeah, there's nothing out, especially kind of out west a little bit, right?
Yeah, there wasn't anything, but
yeah. So it sounds like you had a mixture of friends, and, I think that's pretty common. You're right. Like, you had the kids who partied, and some of these kids who didn't party were like, well, I'll drive you. We'll take care of you.
Yeah.
We'll make sure you get home. And I had several friends like that too growing up that, hey, we'll make sure you get home. We got a place to stay kind of thing. And so that's kind of cool. So were you involved in anything like, clubs or sports in school or anything like that you got involved
I
with?
was in the minor men club.
Okay.
Which was pretty cool. So we'd do some crazy things at basketball games. We went to the 4A championship once up at the University of Utah, and all of us dressed up in togas and cowboy boots, which was kind of weird.
Yeah.
They ended up kicking us out, unfortunately.
Really?
But we took our clothes with us, so we just went out in the parking lot and changed our clothes. Sports-wise, I was big into baseball. I loved playing baseball. Was trying to get on the baseball team for the high school, but politics unfortunately take over quite a bit in those sports.
Sure,
but
yeah.
A bunch of us misfits actually got a soccer team started at Bingham High School, which
right on.
The school said they didn't even want it, and we had a lot of the kids sign petitions so we could get a team. And of course, they didn't fund us or didn't really support us, but it was really cool being a part of the soccer team, and we're the ones that built it. And now soccer is huge out at Bingham. I mean, they have over 100 kids for tryouts, and they've won a couple of championships. And I was fortunate enough to be asked to come back and talk to the kids about how soccer got started at Bingham High School with our old assistant coach who used to be a teacher there. But that was that was pretty cool. I mean,
that is way cool.
They even asked how many kids tried out, and we're like, tryouts? We didn't have tryouts. It was the same misfit kids every year.
Yeah, it's like you're playing. Come on,
you're playing. You
put your books down. Let's go.
And we were all different. I mean, it was so diversified. Is that the right word for it? But
sure.
We were a team. I mean, everybody backed everybody up, so it was really cool.
Well, it's almost like it was more of a cause.
Yeah.
You guys had a purpose, like, no, we're going to do this. And that's got to kind of be surreal. You're now going back, talking to the team and saying, this is how it all started. It's got to make you feel pretty good.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and the funny part was I told the story that when we would travel to go to other high schools to play them, we were the only team that didn't have warm-up jerseys.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they had the sweatpants
they're
and
all
the
decked
jacket
out
and everything, and we're the only ones that didn't because the school didn't support us. And these other schools like Alta and Brighton, they supported them.
Right.
Well, our coach played professional soccer, and he was working as a correctional officer out at the Point of the Mountain, Utah State Prison.
Right.
And he was the correctional officer for the prisoners who were fairly good prisoners.
Yeah.
So one day he showed up with a couple boxes, and we're like, what's this? Well, the prisoners made us all uniforms, which we thought was the coolest thing. It's like, man, our outfits, our warm-up outfits were made from the prisoners, which was really neat. But then the prisoners were so good, our coach was able to get them off for like a release type thing.
Oh, really?
And I remember it like it was yesterday. We're playing Brighton High School, and this bus pulls up that's blue, and it said Utah State Correctional on it, and all these prisoners come walking out, and you should have seen the faces on the other parents.
Oh, I can imagine, yeah.
They're like, what is going on? And all these prisoners came over and lined up on our side of
You're
the
kidding.
field. They were like our cheerleader section. It was the funniest thing, but... yeah, they sat out there and cheered us on for the whole game, and then as soon as the game was over, they were back on the bus and head back out to the prison.
Wow. That's like what you see in the movies, man.
Yeah.
Seriously, that is
like the longest yard, right?
Yes, that's what I was thinking. I'm like, wow, there's a movie about this, isn't there?
Yep, yeah. Yeah,
I
that was
can
pretty
imagine
neat.
the other players going, "What is going on here? Are these guys coming to get us? What's going on?" That is so
Yeah.
neat. What a great story.
Yeah, that was really neat. That's something I'll never forget.
Oh yeah, that's truly amazing. And you're right. I mean, soccer's big everywhere, but to be on the beginning of that back in the, was that the early 80s?
That was actually the late 70s.
Late 70s, okay.
Yeah, so it was our junior year when we got the team
Okay.
going. So you're talking 78, 79.
Yeah,
and,
wow. Okay.
And we actually went to the championship our first year. Yeah, we got knocked out the first round, but we still made it to the championship. So
No way.
we were really excited.
That's amazing. Well, obviously, I know that you have this passion now for helping people, and it kind of goes back to that's what you were doing there. You were trying to make a difference.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I would imagine people who know you say, "Hey, that's who Al is. He's trying to make a difference." And that's what I'm really touched by, honestly, because this is, the world that I've been in for forever, this addiction recovery world. And, you've been in it as well, but in a different capacity. Your wife has struggled with alcoholism, and, I know that took you down this really, dark path. So I'd love to have you share that story with us and kind of what that all entailed and what that looked like, and then, and how that's led to what you're doing today.
Well, probably as you even know, Todd, God works in mysterious ways. I mean, he really does. He takes us down paths that sometimes we shake our head at, going, why are we going through this? And then one day you wake up and you realize why you're going through it.
Yeah.
But it all started, I think coming up this July, I guess it's probably about 13 years ago. I worked for a manufacturing plant here in Salt Lake. And that's where I met my wife. She worked as accounts payable, and we started dating for a while. Dated for 3 years, decided to get married in May of 2009.
Okay.
2009 was the year that life changed completely. So May of 2009, we got married. I decided to try marriage one more time. Thought she was a great.
Mm-hmm.
And then in July of 2009, I lost my job. And then August of 2009, she lost her father from an overdose.
Oh, wow.
And then it was about 6 or 7 months after that, we ended up losing our house. So
wow.
things got pretty bad in 2009. And I knew a little bit of her history, her past history, that she had some bad relationships. She was teased a lot when she was a kid. And I was teased a lot when I was a kid too, being crippled and things like that. I had like the Forrest Gump brace on and things like that. But, we all react differently with tragedies in life. Some people can put it in the back of their brains and never think of it again, or maybe something might trigger it and it just comes for just a short period of time.
Right.
For my wife, it wasn't like that. She just, it stayed with her.
Yeah.
And I remember before we lost our house, we would always have parties on the weekends over at our house, and my garage was set up with TV and dartboard and stereo, and we had a fireplace in the backyard, and we'd have friends come over and family, and we'd play cards, and I started noticing that she just wasn't mixing drinks anymore and just having a few drinks. She was literally grabbing the bottle and just start drinking right out of the bottle. And that's when I started noticing, hey, there's something more that's going on. And I talked to her about it a little bit, and we would get in some heated discussions, about it. And then it got to where she kept going out in the garage. And I'm like, well, that's not like her. So one day I let her go out in the garage, and I kind of snuck around and looked, and she's digging underneath some stuff. And that's when I noticed she was starting to hide bottles. And I'm like, okay, now this isn't good. Yeah. And that's when I knew a problem was really starting to happen. But after we lost our house, we didn't have the money to really get a place, so we lived in the basement of a friend's house. We had some really good friends that opened up their home to us and let us stay, not paying any rent. Of course, we had to help out with groceries and things. But, it was a rough 2 years. My wife started not being able to hold a job because she got to where she wouldn't go in. She'd rather sit home and basically depressed. Right. Feel sorry for herself, which we all do at times. Mm-hmm. And just on again, off again jobs, and the financial burden started kind of coming on to me, and She started going to some rehabs, different things like that. But yeah, it just started getting bad. The drinking, it just wasn't on a weekend anymore or at 5 o'clock. Normally it was 5 o'clock. It was time to have a drink. It was like 9 o'clock in the morning. It didn't matter. So.
Wow. So again, that year, 2009, like you mentioned, was just a really very trying year.
Yeah.
All of that stuff, even just, getting married and all that in itself is a very stressful thing.
Yeah.
It's a good thing, but it can be very stressful at the same time, because now there's a lot of responsibility that comes after that. And, but then losing the job and things like that. And then her losing her father. That is a pretty heavy load for anybody, like you said.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and I could have I could have went the other direction as well. And what's funny is I was more of a partier than she was. I had a lot of responsibility at my job and a lot of stress, and I spent my Fridays and Saturdays partying my butt off, and then Sunday I'd clean myself back up and then be ready for work, and it's like we switched roles. I started trying to figure out who I wanted to be as a person and started looking at life a little differently. And she went from being this person that was going to church every Sunday and she knew more about scriptures and the church and things than I did. And it's all of a sudden like we just did this complete flip. Right. I took the tragedy to figure out who I wanted to be and where I wanted to go, and she took the tragedy the other way. And I think really it's just everything just piled up on top of her, which was already on top of her in the first place.
Right. I hear this a lot from people where, they have a spouse or a son or a daughter who's struggling, but, in this case, obviously it's your spouse. People always say, well, what can I do? What can I say to them? Is there anything I can do? And so I'm wondering, what were the thoughts going through your mind when you're seeing her going through this? And was there anything that you could do? Meaning, you can say things, you can do certain things, but at the end of the day, she's an adult. And how did you get through that part of it? Because so many people struggle with that. Like, what can I tell this person? What am I going to say that will change them? And it's like, well, there is no magic answer to that. So I'm just curious on how you handled that, because that can be very, very, I guess, frustrating and sometimes disappointing.
It's very disappointing. I've shared this on my podcast as well, that I was going to be that knight riding in on a stallion and shining armor and jump off my horse, and here I am to save you, my lady, and it doesn't work. Everything that I tried, I would sit down and say, do you realize you're destroying your life? Do you realize what you're doing to me? You're breaking my heart, or you're causing us financial hardship. And basically, whenever you start saying these type of things to somebody that's battling addiction, they've already got daggers in them. You're just throwing more.
Yeah, you're just adding to the daggers.
But you don't realize it.
Yeah.
You don't realize it. As a person that's on the other side, all you're wanting to do is help, and that's the only way that you know how to help. It's almost kind of like disciplining your kid, in a way.
Right.
And it didn't matter what I tried, and I did the same things over and over and over for 7 years. And you would think after the first year you'd get a clue and go, well, this ain't working, but that's all you know.
Right.
And there's programs out there. There's like Allan and some different. But for somebody like myself, Todd, that Allan didn't work for me. I tried to, 2 or 3 meetings, and I just felt like that I was going there. I was the only one that had a spouse. Everybody else had kids.
Oh, interesting.
And to me, I was already walking in there with a 2-ton weight on my shoulders, and then it felt like by the time I left, I had 10 tons on top of because you just listen to everybody's story and the heartache and the pain that everybody's dealing with. And nothing against Allan, because it has helped thousands and thousands of people. For sure. So I'm not knocking Allan down. It just didn't work for me.
Yeah, it's not for everyone. And
But in all honesty, to answer it, I didn't handle it the right way at all, period. Okay. And I'm learning. People on the other side will never understand the addiction. We never will. We can understand a little bit of it and parts of it, but I feel like we will never fully understand what somebody's going through that's battling with this. Because
Yeah.
I've told the story before, you know, people that battle depression or anxiety, you know, there's medications that they can take that help them cope with that.
Yeah.
People who don't battle, it's just like, what the heck's wrong with you? Just get up and walk out the door with a smile on your face. There's nothing wrong out there in the world.
Right.
Well, somebody who's battling it, that's not that easy.
Yeah.
You know, somebody that has an addiction like my wife's alcoholism, you know, even if I wanted to go home and have a drink and decided when I got home, nah, I'm really not interested. Well, somebody like my wife, they constantly got that finger thumping them on top of the head going, no, you got to have this, because if you don't, you're not going to be able to make it through the night.
Yeah.
And all that anxiety starts building up. And pretty soon, for some reason that we will never understand, they fall back towards it, and that's their escape.
Wow. Yeah, that's so true how you say that. You know, I was thinking we have a therapist here named Wendy. She's our clinical director, and she has probably the best definition of addiction. And it's the perpetual avoidance of legitimate suffering.
Wow, I like that.
So I'm going to say that again. The perpetual avoidance of legitimate suffering. So your wife, and you too, but we're going to just talk about your wife, and especially in 2009, went through a really rough time.
Mm-hmm.
That is legitimate suffering, meaning you lose a job, you lose a loved one. That's out of our control.
Right.
It just is. And that's when life kind of throws the curveball. But that's legitimate in the sense that it's part of life. We have to sit through that. But what we do as addicts is we avoid it. We perpetually avoid it. And what do? We drink it away. We try to pop a pill. We try to do this. Avoid that suffering.
Yeah.
What happens is that suffering's there just brewing. So as soon as you, like you just said, and this is why I thought of it, as soon as you get somewhat cleaned up or sober, there's that, like you said, that finger thumping you on the head going, okay, do you want to deal with this suffering now?
Yeah.
Do you want to and it's like, oh no. So what do? We go back to drinking again.
Yep.
And that doesn't mean that they're weak people or this or that, but that's sometimes what we do. And that's where people, like, when you look at it that way, it kind of puts it in better perspective. I really that definition just, I think, spells it out perfectly.
Yeah, it does.
You know?
I like how that is said.
Yeah. So, you talk about a little bit, you went into some dark places. If you wouldn't mind sharing some of those and just kind of, where you went and then how you kind of got yourself out of those things.
Well, just to kind of start from the point to get there.
Yeah.
So my wife's drinking got pretty heavy, but she finally woke up and she realized what was going on, and she did get clean for 13 months.
Mm-hmm.
The 13 months was incredible. Our relationship was actually better than it was before we even got married.
Right.
It was just awesome. And then one day she decided to take a drink, and that's when her whole life imploded, along with mine. She ended up getting her first DUI shortly after that first drink that she took after 13 months sober.
Wow.
Then a couple of weeks after that, she got pulled over on driving on a suspended license. And then not too long after that, I had gotten so upset coming home, found her really, really drunk, couldn't deal with it. I had a friend who was running a hotel, and she hooked me up for a free night, and my wife come looking for me. She figured out that I was there. They ended up calling the cops. Anyway, the cop was up in my room talking to me. He got a call that there was an accident, and as soon as I heard that come over his radio, I could just feel all the blood just rush right out of my face down to my feet. And I'm like, please don't let that be her.
Wow.
And the officer gets off and he says, what they just described to me, he says, I think it might be your wife. And I'm like, oh no. So he left. He got my phone number and he says, I will call you and let you know. About 45 minutes later, I got a call. And he goes, Mr. Richards, it was your wife. And I'm like, please tell me she didn't hurt anybody or kill anybody, or she didn't get hurt.
Right.
And he goes, luckily, she just hit a parked car, ran into a parked car. It was not in a good neighborhood. One of the cars she hit, I guess, was a car of a gang member.
Oh,
and she had some people trying to keep the gang members from grabbing her, pulling her out of her vehicle to beat on her. Luckily, the cops got there quick enough. But this is the kind of stuff I was coming home to every day. again, with the questions, how did I handle it? I handled it wrong every single time. I would get home, I would be so upset with things, I would start throwing more daggers at her,
Right.
trying to tell her, hey, why don't you grow up? And the stuff that happened to you back in elementary, well, you're an adult, let it go.
Sure.
Yeah, it just got to a point to where I had the cops over all the time. I was always calling the cops because either she was hitting on me or throwing things at me. I couldn't deal with it. I was coming home from an event. It'll be 2 years this June, and I'm going to do my best not to get emotional over this because I usually do get emotional. But
yeah.
I had decided at that time, coming home from that event, I was going to go home, get my gun. I was going to go up in the mountains, and I was going to end my life because I could not deal walking home into a war zone every single flippin' day.
Yeah.
And luckily, I got a phone call on my way home, and I wish I could remember who this person was because I would thank them so much. When I hung up from that phone call, I had a screenshot on my phone at the time of my 2 daughters and my 3 grandkids. And as soon as I saw that picture, I just broke down and started bawling. I pulled off the side of the road. I don't know how long I was there, but I just sat there and cried, thinking, I am thinking about taking my life because of what is happening in my personal life, what's happening at home, taking time away that my daughters have with their dad and time away that my grandkids have with their papa. And I have a friend, she actually is retiring here pretty soon, but she worked for the West Jordan Police, and she ran a program called the Peer Support Program where she helped a lot of our first responders.
Okay.
And so I called her up and I said, hey, this is what's going on, and I'm thinking about taking my life, and what do I do? And she was such a huge help for me. She's like, Al, this is what you need to do. Get yourself out of this situation. Go somewhere, go to a family member, go to a friend's, just pull yourself out of that situation, and we'll go from there. And I took her advice and got myself out of the situation, and I was able to get back home pretty quick because they ended up finding my wife. She had a warrant out for arrest, and she ended up getting thrown back in jail, and so I was able to come back home. But
wow.
That's kind of what I kept everything in, Todd. I think a lot of times us on the other side of the addiction, we're embarrassed. We don't want to tell our family and friends that we have a son or a daughter or a husband or a wife or a grandchild or whatever that's battling addiction, no matter what the addiction is. It's almost embarrassing for us. And I done a lot of networking because I've been involved with chambers.
Yeah.
And people who know me, I walk into a room, I am energetic, I'm hugging everybody, high fives, shaking hands. I just love on people.
Sure.
But when people started pulling me off to the side going, you okay? Because you don't seem like the same you. And because I was putting on a front.
Yeah.
I thought I was being the same me, but people who really know me could see it.
Could tell, yeah.
So I finally decided it was time that the embarrassment was done. My family didn't even have a clue. And so I started talking to people that I felt like that I could trust, would meet for coffee, and I'd go, hey, okay, this is what's going on with me. And as I started sharing my story more and more, people that I've known for years were starting to pull me off to the side going, can I talk to you privately? And I'd be like, yeah, and we'd go off to the corner or somewhere in a different room. And they would be like, I don't know if you knew it, but I was an addict. Or I don't know if you knew it, but my son or my daughter's battled this. Or I don't know if you knew it, but my mom was an alcoholic. And I don't know, it was just really blowing me away how bad addiction is. It's like they say cancer affects everybody, every family.
Yeah, right.
And
every
it
member
does.
Of it, yeah.
Yeah. And addiction does the same thing.
For sure.
when they say addiction is not an individual disease, it's definitely a family disease.
Yeah, it affects every person, in different ways, as you said.
Yeah.
And then when you got people who notice, Al's usually the life of the party. The guy's just got energy. Something's off.
Yeah.
What's going on? But what's also, I guess, kind of a blessing through all this is people coming up to you going, "Hey, I've been there. I've struggled," or, I'd like to talk to you about it, and that kind of thing. And so now you got people reaching out to you for those reasons, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
Again, connection, right? You're connecting with people who understand.
Well, and that's what started me on this path.
Mm-hmm.
I remember the first time my one of my family members. So I'm on a rodeo committee for West Jordan and have been for coming up on 7 years. But my aunt came to pick up some tickets that I had for her to invite my aunt and uncle to the rodeo.
Oh, cool.
And my aunt asked me, how's your wife doing? And I just bawled. All of a sudden, I just busted out in tears, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, what's going on?"
Yeah,
and I said, "My wife's an alcoholic." That's the first time I shared it with a family member.
Really?
And I'm really close to my aunt.
Okay.
And just that question, I just
the floodgates
broke out bawling. But as I started sharing the story a little bit more, I was sitting down with coffee with a friend, and I was telling him my story and what's been going on and what I was dealing with. Told him that I was almost thought about taking my own life. And that's when he said, "Al, you need to share this." And I'm like, "Are you kidding me? Why?" He goes, "'Cause there are people out there that need to hear this, because there's people out there that have gone through the same or are going through the same thing that you're going through."
For sure.
And I'm like, "Who would want to hear it?" And he goes, "Who wouldn't?"
Right.
So that's when the wheels started turning, going, maybe this is the reason why I've gone through everything that I've gone through. I'm a spiritual person, and I've hit my knees many times, whether you believe in God or a higher power, whatever it may be. But I remember asking God, why do I continue to go through this? I've started a divorce 3 times, and I've canceled it 3 times because something has kept me there.
Something's kept you, yeah.
But I believe the reason why I've gone through it as much is because I wasn't getting it yet. And I think God was trying to get me to open my eyes to say, you need to look at this in a different way. And 5 to 6 months ago, I think it was about 6 months ago, my eyes finally opened.
Mm.
And that's where now the change has gone 360.
Wow. So it reminds me of a quote by Alan Watts. He says, "When we're ready to wake up, we're going to wake up. If we're not ready to wake up, we're going to stay pretending that we're just a poor little me." And I really do believe this. You've probably heard me say this, Al, in some previous events or podcasts, where I think addiction is, or adversity, because on your side of things, is the wake-up call to our greatness.
Yeah.
And the stuff you're doing now, it's like you're showing your true greatness through all of these trials and tribulations, and now you're making an impact in a much different way, right?
I'm hoping so.
Yeah.
I really am. I'm really hoping that if I could save one person who's thinking about taking their life like I did, to me, then it's been worth everything that I've gone through.
For sure. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about, what are you doing? Obviously, we mentioned the podcast, The Other Side of Addiction. Let's talk about that and what your goal is with that. And then, if you have any other things that you're doing. So what was the change, and then what have you decided to start doing moving forward?
So the change basically was the communication, the way I was communicating with my wife. Also, one of the biggest factors was I finally decided that it was time for me to move forward in my life. I needed to take control of my life, because I spent, especially the last 4 years, being a part of my wife's life. I was always trying to catch her drinking. I was always looking for booze. Everything, my life consumed the addiction.
That's exhausting too, right?
Yeah. I mean, it was just mentally draining me. And once I decided to get on with my life, it's like, when you get on a flight to go somewhere, and they're starting to taxi out of the area, and you get the flight attendants that get up to go over the safety procedures. You know, when it talks about if they lose cabin pressure, the masks fall down, and they say always put it on yourself first
right.
before you help your child or somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's a reason for that, because how can you help somebody if you can't take care of yourself?
Yeah.
Well, I wasn't taking care of myself.
Yeah.
All I was trying to do was take care of her, and her battles were my battles. But I finally woke up and said, okay, her battles are her battles. She has to fight them.
Mm-hmm.
I will be there to help her as much as I can, but I'm not going to let it consume me anymore. So I started changing the way I communicated with her, and I started taking over my own life in the way I wanted to go. But before I got to that point, in February of 2020, I decided I was going to become a speaker. I wanted to speak and get up and share my story.
Yeah.
And I did a talk out at Copper Hills High School for a class, and then I was invited to talk at a luncheon at a Murray Chamber event.
Oh, cool.
And I was getting some really good reviews coming back, even though I've not had any experience, but I was just being me.
Just being real.
Just like we are right now,
Exactly.
just being real.
Yeah.
And,
that's awesome.
you know, there were times right in front of, 30, 40 people, I broke down, started crying, and I apologized at first, and people were like, no, because you had us in tears as well. We know what you felt.
For sure.
You're really feeling.
Yeah.
And then, of course, COVID hit and kind of put a damper
halt
to that.
on those things, yeah.
But that's where I'm heading at right now. And for a year, I've had the idea of a podcast. I met a young, she's not a young lady, she's the same age as me, but we met on Facebook, and on my Facebook page, I put a lot of positive affirmations and things out there. I've been doing it for about 4 or 5 years, and she reached out to me, and she goes, hey, I like what you're saying, and I'd like to meet you, and we met for coffee. She drove all the way down from Ogden, and we met for some coffee, and she started sharing her story, and she just hit 6 years sober about 4 or 5 months ago.
Cool.
And she had gone through a pretty terrible life, but she goes, yeah, I want to be a speaker and share my story. And I'm like, well, so do I. And then I'm like, yeah, I'd really like to get a podcast going. And she goes, so would I. So we started kind of bashing heads a little bit and throwing some ideas. And then as 2021 was coming up, I finally just said, you know what? I don't care what's going to happen. We're going.
We're just gonna
I got a hold of her, and I says, how do you feel about it? She goes, let's do it. So I started reaching out to people, started taking some online classes, and, some people want a lot of money to help you do the thing. But luckily, I know some really good people, and I'd reach out to them, and they're like, you don't need to do that.
Right.
But luckily I ran into this gentleman, and we met for coffee, and I sat down, and he goes, I've had people come on my show before, and they turn it into an AA meeting, and I don't want an AA meeting.
Yeah.
But he says, what you have, he says, I think we can take this somewhere. And he goes, what's your main priority for it? And I says, to help other people who have been in the same boat that I've been in.
Right.
And he goes, I will do whatever I can to help you. And again, that was another favor that God gave me, and
I love it.
So that's where I'm heading. I'm taking the pain and the heartache, and hopefully I can start speaking again and getting out there and sharing my story, and also sharing what I have been learning on the communication skills, so I can help other people learn how to get their life back.
Yeah, I love what you said, and again, I love what you're doing. But I love when you said what changed is you learned to communicate the right way towards your wife.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people need to hear that. Like, what does that look like? What does that sound like? And I know, that could be a whole nother podcast in and of itself, because I think people don't know what to say.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like you were hurt. And what did you do? You came home and you thought you're doing good, but you're throwing daggers. Didn't really realize that because you're hurting too.
Mm-hmm.
But I love when you said, I had to also take care of myself. And I think that's a key point in someone who's dealing with a spouse or a loved one who's going through this. You do have to take care of yourself. You just do. And I know it's hard. And then learning to communicate the right way to what they're going through. You know, I love that was such a key point that you said just a minute ago that I loved.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it's and it's funny because as I started taking care of myself, the communication actually came through the back door, and I didn't even know it was coming through the back door.
Right.
You know, so when my wife got out of detox again, she had some health issues. The last time that she drank, she did some really bad damage to herself, and thank goodness she's gotten past that. Her health has gotten good again.
Good, yeah.
But I allowed her to be back underneath my roof under certain rules.
Yeah.
And it was kind of weird because about the second or third week that she was back home, she came up to me and she goes, "Can I give you a hug?" And I said, "Yeah, you can give me a hug." And she looked at me and she goes, "You've changed." I said, "What do you mean I've changed?" She goes, You're different." She goes, "You're talking to me differently." And she goes, "And you have just moved on with your life, and I don't know if I like that." And I says, "Well, I've got to move on with my life because I was thinking about taking my life because of this." And the communication skills that I learned, I learned a lot of like I statements. So I, 3 or 4 weeks afterwards, I remember I came home one day and I told her, I says, "You know what? I really like it that I've been able to come home and you're sober. I really like who you are.
Yeah.
When you're like this, you remind me of this person that I fell in love." It was, you remind me of, instead of going, "Why are you this way?"
You. It's about me.
It's about me. And she would make comments with things, and then I would say, "You know what? I understand why, or I may not understand why you said this, but this is how it makes me feel when you make this kind of comment."
Yeah.
And those, just changing your words around just a little bit, all of a sudden she started changing. And I wasn't even trying.
Right.
I wasn't trying to be this knight in shining armor to save her. It was just happening.
Sure.
And little by little, I mean, she hits 4 months sober this Friday.
Oh, congratulations.
And I'm so proud of her.
Yeah.
But I've learned so much, One thing that I did wrong, to kind of go back to that, is I've got a friend of mine who has, we were at a network group, and he come up and he says, "I want to show you this because I know you'd appreciate it." And he reaches in his pocket and he pulls out this coin, and it's a 5-year chip.
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Dude, you just hit 5 years." And he goes, "Yeah." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, that is so cool. Congratulations." And you know how when they pass it around, you rub it. Everybody rubs it, and you get
power to me.
You get the mojo going.
Yeah.
And I gave it back to him, and I said, "Yeah, I remember when my wife hit her first year." And I says, "I went and bought her a chip. And I gave it to her, but when she started drinking, I took that chip away from her." I'm like, "You don't deserve this." And he looked at me with, I literally thought he was going to headbutt me. But he's like, he goes, "You took it away?" And I'm like, "Yeah." He goes, "You don't ever take a chip away. Whether she started drinking or not, she earned that 13 months sober, or that 12 months sober, or that 3 months sober, the 6 months. She earned it." He says, "I got a drawer full of 3 months chips and 6 months chips and 9, I've got drawers full of them." So he says, "You don't ever take it away." So that evening when my wife came home from work, I apologized to her. I says, "I was so wrong to take that chip away from you because you earned it."
Yeah.
And she goes, "I have been trying to get you to understand that for how many years now?"
Right.
But as she wasn't listening to me, I wasn't listening to her either.
Yeah. Wow.
So
that's a powerful story.
Yeah, it hit me hard.
Yeah. Because again, it's earned. I mean, it's just because there's a relapse doesn't take away the good that happened in that 13 months or that year or whatever it was, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because she worked her behind off to
for
get
sure
to
to
that
get
point.
there.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, blood, sweat, and tears, man. I'm telling you.
Yeah.
Dang, that is powerful. So your podcast is called The Other Side of Addiction.
Mm-hmm.
How can people find this, and how can they learn more about you? What's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
They can find the podcast on Resilience Talk Network.
Okay.
They're on Spotify. They're on Facebook. They're on YouTube. I mean, they're on all the platforms out there.
Right.
I also have a Facebook page that's called AR The Other Side of Addiction, or you can find it by going at Mr. Al Richards.
Okay.
And I put stories up there. I post like affirmations, and then I'll put comments underneath it. I just posted our first episode on there.
Congratulations.
Yeah,
dude, that's no small feat, dude.
No, it's
that's
not.
Awesome.
It's not, and I hope it works for everybody. I've had a few people say that they couldn't get the link to work,
right.
But it'll be getting better as we're working through the kinks and we're growing. So, which I'm sure you know.
Oh yeah, I laugh. I'm not kidding you. I've done a whole podcast without hitting the record button. Like the whole thing was done. We're like, okay, that was great, and I look over. Well, that was a good conversation. Can we come do this again?
Yeah.
I mean, so yeah, it's like you'll have those moments, but I love what you're doing, Al. I think it's well needed, especially with the angle you're coming from. I think we need more of that. We do hear a ton of people who have been through it themselves and how they've overcome, but it's great to hear someone like you who's been, like you said, the other side.
Yeah.
And your perspective and your view. And really, like you said, both of you are suffering. You're both going through a hard time.
Yeah, the addiction is it's got us both.
It's got you both.
Yep.
And so, yeah, that's just beautifully said. Well, so future plans are to get back, do more speaking, obviously do more podcasts. Anything else on the horizon for you, or is that just kind of where you're focused right now?
That's really where my passion is at. They can also reach out to me on email, which is Mr. Al Richards @gmail.com. Very, very simple. I was lucky and fortunate enough to be able to have the Mr. Al Richards for the Facebook and the Instagram page to also
usually those
have
are
it
gone,
as a
right?
Gmail, right?
Yeah.
So it works out really good.
Mr. Al Richards @gmail.com.
Yep, Mr. Al Richards @gmail.com.
Well, one last thing I want to ask you: if there's someone listening to this right now who is on the other side and they're struggling, they're not sure what to do, they're stuck, and they don't know how to communicate, they don't know how to do this. What's some advice? You've already given some really good advice, but that one person that's listening to this right now that's like, man, I need some help. What would you tell them?
I would tell them, find a friend, or I'm sure even if you Google, there's places out there, but find somebody that you can actually sit down and share your story with and get it out there to release it, because that really helped me. It didn't take everything away from inside, but it took a big heavy load.
But it helped
off of me. Yeah. It really helped. And again, find somebody who is there to listen to you, not as I heard this in a class. People don't like to be shit on. You should do this. Don't let people say you should do this, you should do that, because they don't understand what you're going through either. Just like we don't understand what the person who's battling the addiction.
Exactly.
So find somebody that will sit and listen to you. And, I'm not a therapist, but if you feel like wanting to reach out to me, I also have some connections that I really believe that could be a big help.
Right.
It's free. They will actually give you a book and a workbook that actually walks you through scenarios. I was in a class last night, on a Zoom class, and walked through, and the stuff they were talking about last night, I mean, I've shoved a lot of stuff in the back of my head, but man, did it bring on some triggers. So
I bet
it's just not the person who battles addiction that has triggers. We have triggers
as
well.
For sure.
And I was getting a ton of those triggers yesterday, and I was marking off all kinds of things. So, that's the advice I could give them. Just get out there, release it. Don't hang on to it. Do not be embarrassed. Please just do not be embarrassed. If family members don't understand, I have some family members that don't understand. That's okay. That's them. All that matters is me. What's going to help me? I don't need them to understand if they don't get it, because there are people out there that are willing to listen and help.
Oh, I love that, Al. That's great advice. I love that. Just reach out to someone, share your story with someone, because just by talking can make you feel so much better. Just like, you sitting down with some people that have pulled you aside, come talk to me, that kind of thing. And couldn't agree more. I love it. Well, I love what you're doing, Al. I love that you're so passionate about it, and obviously so because of what you've been through, and you really are going to be a great influence for good. You already are, but it's just going to grow. And I'm grateful to have you on this podcast to share your story with us. And thank you for being willing to take the time and be vulnerable with your story with us.
Well, Todd, thank you. Thank you for allowing me to be on your show.
Absolutely.
And I'm going to give you a little plug too. So
okay.
Your book, I Am Recovered, an amazing, amazing book. You had me in tears reading that book. And I have actually shared that a few times talking with people, and I believe we even brought that up last week in our podcast.
Oh, really?
About it, yeah,
wow.
and what kind of changed your path as well. So thank you for that book, because I know your book has probably helped a ton of people, and I got to get your other one. So I'll have to read that one.
Yeah,
now.
I've actually got it here. I'll give it to you.
Oh, that is awesome. Yeah, because I've got your other one dog-eared and highlighted all over the place of things that really touched me. So yes,
right on.
So thank you for what you're doing as well.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, just amazing.
Well, it's great to rub shoulders with you and get to know you better. And it's just interesting. We have a common background, and it just almost like a brotherhood, right? I feel really close to you right now, and so thank you. And I'm just grateful that I can't wait to see where you go, and I'll help you every step of the way. Anything I can do to help you pursue and help you get to where you need to be, I'm happy to do that.
Thank you. Greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much.
You betcha. Well, folks, there you go. Thank you for joining in once again. Please reach out to Al and check out his podcast. And, if you have a question for him, shoot him an email and he'll be happy to help you. He's that guy that's not afraid to listen, and also he'll give you some really good advice. So please reach out to him. And again, I'm grateful to have him on, and I'm grateful for all of you. I love you guys. Your support is just overwhelming. I have so much gratitude right now. I love you. And then for those who are listening to this who are suffering, please reach out. Please find some help. I'm here for you. Al's here for you. And we'll do whatever we can. If we can't help you, we will guide you to the people that can. And we're all in this together at the end of the day. And so anyway, love you guys. And until next time, thanks, Al.
Thank you.